not an independent passage. So I just wanted to highlight before we start a few of the things that may or may not be obvious to you. Okay. One, this is a breakfast meal that happens by the Sea of Tiberias. But it also references another meal that happened along that sea, which had a few more people, I think 5,000. And then the meal that Jesus prepared was on a charcoal fire. This is the second place in scriptures where charcoal fire is mentioned. Do you know the first one? When they were warming themselves in the court, Jesus was on trial and Peter denied Christ 3 times. And later on in this passage, Jesus asks that question, do you love me 3 times? And then the other is follow me. At the end of this passage, Jesus says, follow me. After he's asked the questions 3 times, follow me. The story began with Jesus meeting some fishermen at the sea and said to them, follow me. So it's come full circle. So this passage begins by saying, after these things. So the question is, after what? So what's happened before this? That did happen before. Lots of stuff happened before, but that's not what this is talking about. It's a little later than that. What happens after that?
There were stories of Jesus appearing.
Jesus' appearance. What are those stories up until now?
He appeared on the road to Emmaus.
Okay. Saw the women at the tomb.
Okay, yeah.
And then in the upper room when they were locked out and Thomas wasn't there.
Yeah.
And then when Thomas was there, I knew you did that. It's a Sunday school teacher. Yeah. Yeah. So that's what's happened before this. Jesus comes and he greets them and then he leaves. So these were kind of confusing times, as you can imagine. Jesus would appear, he would say, have peace, and then he'd be gone for days at a time. So what pops into my mind, at least, is where did he go? And why did he go? Okay, for the where, there's just absolutely no answer. And the obvious places might be to Lazarus' home area and Martha's home, but if he did that, word would have got out. We would have heard about it. So where? I don't know. There just are no good answers. But why? Why? That's one we might be able to get our hands around. Why did he come, say, have peace, and then disappear for days? Well, I think he made those appearances to reassure them that he was indeed resurrected. And he reassured them so that they would be able to move forward. But I think he left so that they wouldn't become dependent upon him again in that same way. Because the natural order of things would be, okay, Jesus is here, let's get in line, let's follow him, let's listen to his stories, let's listen to whatever. But now it was going to be their job. And so he just appeared enough to reassure them, but not enough to make them dependent in the old ways. Disciples, as you can imagine, didn't know what to do. Their emotions were spent. They weren't ready to take any more chances. Too much had happened. Their world was just spinning too much. Their lives were thrown off balance by Easter. Easter does that. It can be frightening when you're off balance. And what you were expecting didn't turn out like you were expecting. Well, Joe Garagiola, this is baseball season after all, tells about a time when Stan Musial was up at the plate in a critical time in the game. Now, Stan was one of the all-time great hitters. He was on a hot streak. And the pitcher was a young, inexperienced pitcher. He was a bit nervous. And so Joe put down the sign for fastball. Pitcher shook his head. Then he put down a sign for curveball, and pitcher shook him off again. So then Joe gave the sign for the pitcher's best pitch. Again, there was hesitation, and so Joe took off his mask. He went out to pitcher's mound to talk to him and said, "I've given you every single signal in the book. What do you want to throw?" Nervously he said, "Nothing. I just want to hold on to it as long as I can." That's how it was with the disciples. They weren't ready to take any chances, and so they went back to the place they knew best. They went back to fishing. It is after Easter, after the great resurrection, and these disciples of Jesus have resumed their fishing, gone back to doing what they did before. Now, it'd be easy for us to pass judgment on them, but at least they're not locked away anymore. After a couple of weeks of being locked away in fear, those words of peace at least got them out of that upper room. It seems rather startling to us as we hear it that these 7 disciples are suddenly out of Jerusalem, back in Galilee, going about what they knew best, fishing. Jesus finds them fishing, which isn't surprising since that's where he found them in the first place. They went back to work. They went back to what they knew. They went back to their routine. It's easy to hide from God in our routine. That's a word for us. Just as they thought it would be easy to hide going back to the routine, sometimes we get so caught up in our routine that we avoid the word that God has for us. And maybe it shouldn't be surprising that Jesus calls his disciples again. This is the second time he said to them, "Follow me." Because I think in our lives, often we need to be reminded to follow Jesus. We kind of lose our way. But Jesus continues to come to us. William makes the point, if you are to be met by the risen Christ, it may not be on Sunday in church. Could easily be on Monday when you were at work or at school, or fill in the blank, whatever it is you do daily. The risen Christ, he says, is free and moving. He does not intend to remain boxed in to one day a week, 1 hour in church. He intrudes, comes to you where you are, speaks to you, and reveals himself to you. Pay attention tomorrow when you're sitting at your desk or washing the clothes or sweeping the floors or reading the book or teaching a class. Easter is true, and Easter means, among other things, that Jesus is loose and he's looking for you. Yet sometimes we don't want to be found. It's easier not to be found. And like Peter, sometimes we have guilt. We feel like we're not good enough. We've messed up. We have failed. But the word of this scripture passage to us is that Jesus doesn't give up on us. There was an up-and-coming executive at IBM who was in charge of the company's efforts to enter the photocopying market. Turned out to be a disaster. They lost over $11 million. And so the exec was called into Thomas Watson's office, who was at that point the president of IBM. And as Watson was talking to him, he sensed that the executive was getting more and more anxious. And finally he said, "What's wrong? You're not hearing me." The young exec said, "Well, it's obvious you're going to fire me." Watson said, "Fire you? We just paid $11 million for your education." Jesus doesn't give up on us. In every case where Jesus comes to one of the disciples, the focus is always on moving forward. He's not saying, well, let's just pretend the past didn't happen. But by offering forgiveness, even before it's asked, he helps people to take care of the old business so that the new business of life can take place. For the woman caught in adultery, the focus is on the future. Go your way, and from now on, don't sin anymore. For the prodigal, the focus was on becoming part of the family again. This son of mine was dead and now is alive. do we go now that he's back? For Peter, the focus is on the work that God has for him. Tend my sheep. Follow me. Do the work God gives to you. Words for us as well. Yet as often happens, Jesus comes to us. Jesus breaks through, and they recognize that it's Jesus. Well, they sort of recognize Jesus. Did you notice that in the review? They were there having breakfast with him, and they were afraid to ask, is this really you? Is this really you? They recognized him, sort of. And isn't that how it is in our lives? We recognize God at work, sort of. We're not really sure. So the disciples immediately turned the boat toward the shore, toward Jesus. Yet Peter didn't wait for any of that. He jumped overboard and he went. He left behind the boat. He left behind the fish. He left behind the disciples. He left behind everything. Nothing would stop him or slow him down. Are you ready to drop everything to follow Jesus? Remember the last time Jesus and his disciples sat down at the seaside? He fed the crowds. He fed them fish and bread. Once again, Jesus took the bread and he gave it to them. It's an image here of the Eucharist. Clearly, the presence of the risen Christ was there. To their question, is this really you, that was unasked, he broke the bread and gave it to them. Jesus is calling or recalling the disciples. Yet at the same time, he singles out Peter for special instruction. Peter had denied Jesus 3 times before a charcoal fire on that terrible night. Now Jesus asks him 3 times, do you love me? Before another charcoal fire. That had to hurt. Jesus says to Peter, that's done with now. Feed my sheep, care for my sheep, love my sheep. Jonathan Colesville speaks to many churches about the plight of children in blighted areas of the United States. And he usually says this. When Jesus said to Simon Peter, if you love me, feed my sheep, he didn't say only the sheep who dwell in the green pastures. He didn't say only the sheep whose mothers please us by acceptable behavior. He didn't say only the sheep whose fathers have good jobs and mothers belong to the PTA. He didn't say only the sheep whose parents make smart choices. He didn't say only the sheep that have 2 parents in the pen. He just said, if you love me, love all my sheep. Greg Ballard tells a wonderful story about what happened to him. He said, I was sitting in front of Radio City Music Hall on the wall of the fountain nearby Midtown Manhattan one day on my lunch break, and I decided to buy a hot dog from a nearby vendor. As usual, the streets were crowded with people, the mob moving past. As I waited in line, I couldn't help but notice a well-groomed man of average dress looking to be in his mid-30s. Man was leaning against a wall, looking like he was waiting for someone. As I paid for my meal, he turned, straightened himself, and started walking my way. When I took the hot dog and began to step away, the man suddenly sprang forward and grabbed my food. Immediately, we began to tussle. As he tried to wrench the food from my hand, he began to scream, feed me, over and over again. I finally gained control of the situation and, pulling away, said without thinking, get your own food. Behind me, I heard the vendor say, leave my customer alone, I'll feed you. No, he cried out, I want him to feed me. He said quickly, looking back to see why he had picked out me, I found that the man had disappeared into the crowd. Suddenly, he said, I felt sick at heart. I'd never been so disappointed in myself. In my pockets were enough money to feed 20 people hot dogs. Acting on a human instinct, I hadn't wanted anyone taking something that was mine. Isn't that our reaction? So as I returned to my seat at the fountain wall, my friend asked, "What was all that about?" "I don't know," I replied. "I'm really not sure." They said, "I have relived that scene over and over in my mind many times, and it still haunts me." See, that's a picture of Jesus coming to his disciples who are afraid, saying, "Have peace. Find peace. Feed my sheep." And then he disappears into the crowd to who knows where, for who knows how long. Pastor was sharing about her family and talking about her father in particular, and she said, "My dad would have understood what Jesus was saying to Peter." One Christmas Eve in church, the place was pretty well packed when the town drunk came staggering into church. Everybody slid over in the aisle so that there didn't seem to be any place to sit. My dad stood up and motioned for him to come and sit with my family. She said, "Dad kept doing strange things like that. Sometimes I thought he was losing his mind. Once when Dad backed his car into a telephone pole, another street person came up and said, 'Hey, you really did a number on that car, didn't you?' My dad said, 'Yeah, I did. Thank you very much,' and he shook his hand. 'Bless you, sir,' said the street person. And she said, 'Then I realized that Dad had pressed a $5 bill into his hand.' 'What'd you do that for?' I wanted to know. 'He'll probably just drink it.' Father said that's his option, but he needed someone to be kind to him. And I needed someone to be kind to. Feed my sheep." Notice when Jesus revealed himself to the disciples, the first thing he does is to give them work to do, or rather gives them love to do. That's what that connection with God is about. God loves us and gives us love to do. When Jesus asks, "Do you love me?" it wasn't a line from some chick flick. It was a hard question for a fisherman from the docks. It was real. It is just as hard for us to hear and to honestly answer. Do you love me? It is difficult because to love Jesus, we must love and feed his sheep, his people, all of his sheep. If you think it's easy,